Greetings, everyone. Pete Pardo here from Sea of Tranquility. Welcome to another episode of Friday Morning at the Funhouse alongside Mr. Martin Popoff in the co-captain's chair. What's going on, Martin?
Morning, sir. Well, getting ready to do this is gonna be a lot of fun, but yeah, winter is absolutely on its way. It's a good time to talk prog, I suppose.
I think so. I think so. So a couple weeks ago, I said to Martin, I was like, well, why don't we try and figure out what the first ever progressive metal album was? We've already talked about what we thought was the first prog album and the first metal album, right? And whether we solved anything, I don't know, but it's
Yep.
always fun trying to get to a certain point and trying to figure it all out. So we were like talking about what could be the first ever progressive metal album. And so we've done a very similar thing to what we did the last time is we did kind of like went in a timeline and we've come to our what we think is our consensus pick for first ever prog metal album. And so we've got a before and we have an after. And again, there's no right or wrong answer here. Really, there's a lot of could be's here. There's a lot of bands that we're going to mention today, a lot of albums that we're going to mention today where folks watching going to be like, well, that's not metal and that's really not progressive. But remember, we're talking about the building blocks, right?
Yeah.
So some of these albums may have elements of what we would later come to realize as being a big part of progressive metal. And maybe some not so much, but we'll see how it goes when we get there. So Martin's going to take the first half this time around up until the album that we think might be the first ever prog metal album, and then I'll go and take all the stuff that kind of came afterwards that maybe built upon that other things that went on in that album. So Martin, I don't know if you want to give any other lead in here before we get started.
No, that's a perfect explanation. Yeah. So we've got a first half, a consensus in the middle, then Pete's gonna do the second half. Um, but yeah, I wanted to mention, for more on this topic, a buddy of ours, Jeff Wagner, wrote a book called Mean Deviation, 4 decades of progressive metal, and he's got a new Voivod book coming up
Yeah.
shortly. So I've got a
Yep.
progressive metal shirt on here, but he's got a book out called "Always Moving: The Strange Multiverse of Voivod," coming, which is gonna be very cool. So yeah, just to kick things off, um, I kind of figured it's kind of interesting. We've got a band here that featured in our few are going to do this, but featured in our first metal album discussion as well. Jimi Hendrix Experience with "Are You Experienced?" 67, Axis Bold as Love. Later in 67, December 1st, Electric Ladyland, October 16th, 68. They only made the 3 albums. It's arguably how metal they are, arguably how prog they are. They're certainly underground rock, acid rock. He's almost like a pre-Vertigo music kind of band.
Yeah.
It can be kind of proggy, out there, psychedelic. We know psychedelia is a massive input throughput piece into prog. It's basically, I kind of look at it as psychedelia either caused prog or caused heavy metal bands, kind of thing, right?
Yep.
In some cases, I guess it caused that next weird little watery country rock thing that happened as well. So it turns into a bunch of these things, but it definitely turns into prog.
As well as
So
Glam
yeah.
too. Glam too had a big part in that as well.
Yep, exactly. Yep. So yeah, I think this band was cerebral enough and good enough players enough, and they went to a lot of places to be considered part of this discussion. Next, I've got something like Tommy. We talked about the concept album as being a big important input into prog, but there are hard-hitting rockin' bands with crazy drummers and crazy bass players and noisy, Marshall amp pioneering guitarists that made concept albums too. And this is that weird. I think this is the orchestral version of Tommy. Um, but yeah, comes in various formats. But I mean, this band also did the Who sells out, sell out, and Tommy is a double concept album. Later on, they do Quadrophenia as well. So there's no way to describe the Who really, but they're semi a hard rock band, and they love their concept albums, so that's why they're included here. Next, we've got another one like Jimi Hendrix, where this is a band that figures prominently and very prominently in the first prog album. discussion, and they happen to figure prominently in the first progressive metal discussion as well, because this is kind of heavy, kind of rocking, especially the most famous song from it, their most famous song ever. Um, but yeah, this is a fairly rocking, not rocking. It definitely doesn't rock. It's loud and noisy, is what it is at times. So it's kind of a little heavy at the same time as it is more or less single handedly inventing prog, I suppose. Um, so that's May 19th, 69 for the Hoots, Tommy, October 10th, 69. And then in rock, we kind of wanted to bring this up again.
Yep.
Kind of important with Child in Time, with a classical based approach to heavy metal. This figured very prominently in our inventing heavy metal thing. But yeah, good players, John Lord, Richie Blackmore, Child in Time's on here, some other long songs with a lot of changes. Kind of put them in. Atomic Rooster, Death Walks Behind You, September 1970. Put that in as well. Uriah Heep comes next, and I've always championed this one as a big deal in the progressive metal discussion because this is it's Roger Dean artwork. It's called Demons and Wizards, which is pretty proggy. It looks proggy. It's kind of doomy, but it's a keyboard-based band. It's got really cool vocals as well, so they're really interesting players. Paradise the Spell is 1241 on here. We've got songs like The Wizard and Traveler in Time. So this is a hard rock album. I often consider this the very first power metal album. And for that, you could put in Deep Purple and Roth as well.
Yep.
Captain Beyond, kind of put that in there. You got the spacey mascot on the cover. It's a weird, trippy, psychedelic album that is both heavy and it goes to a lot of interesting places. We've got the likes of your or we'll just hold both of these up at once. We're not showing them all the time here, but we've got Styx. I've always considered to be part of this thing, being they're that kind of Midwest rock thing, Chicago. So it can be kind of like boogie party rock and roll, but it definitely can be proggy at times as well. And they're very keyboardy band. They definitely love their prog, and they definitely are fairly heavy at times. So we've got Styx 1, August 31st, 72. Styx 2 is going to come in July 23. But also in 72, again, super important. I'm feeling very strongly about these ones as most important precursors, pretty much, because here you've got the title track, "The Magician's Birthday," coming in at 10:23. It goes to all sorts of crazy places, and the rest of it, there's a lot of proggy kind of things on here, almost like heavy, moody blues or very Deep Purple like stuff. Keyboards again, vocals again, Roger Dean artwork, gatefold. Looks like a prog album on the inside too. Looks like a Yes album.
Yep.
Essentially, right?
Yep.
Let's see. Then we've got the likes of King Crimson again with your Lark's Tongue in Aspic. There's a couple copies of that. And we wanted to include this while skipping a couple of things, because this is where they kind of toughen up their sound. They become kind of crazy, weird, insane power trio kind of sound on these records. It's pretty aggressive, and they weren't really playing guitar this way. In the especially in the really weird krautrock interim days in there. Here's one kind of interesting to put in here. Led Zeppelin. This band gets called progressive metal. Sometimes, not often, but with the long songs, with the things going all over the place, with John Paul Jones playing keyboards and stuff. So you kind of don't feel it about Zeppelin 1. You don't really feel it about 2, 3, 4. But for some reason, this one gets put into the discussion a little more, pretty much because of songs like Song Remains the Same, Dancing Days a little bit, definitely No Quarter at 7 minutes, not particularly The Ocean, the Rain Song, Over the Hills and Far Away. So you've got your heavy rock, you've got your acoustic, pretty interesting. The Hypnosis cover art looks like a Pink Floyd album cover. I bet Pink Floyd's wishing they would have had this one.
Yeah.
But let's see. Styx 2, we talked about Styx Serpentis Rising, so I've just got more Styx here, building that case. It really does build a case because with so many albums before our true answer, you could definitely make a full-blown progressive metal album or two out of the Styx catalog. Um, next we've got something like this is Black Sabbath's Sabbath Bloody Sabbath. Some people call this a progressive metal album. I don't particularly. I think people are just somewhat thinking about the keyboards, some mellow stuff on here, some acoustic. Although Black Sabbath, one thing that is integral to what they do is they put in a lot of parts that don't necessarily make sense together, and they make up these songs. So they break a lot of rules. And as time went on, I mean, they were always breaking rules, but I suppose they really start breaking rules a lot on this one. So that is November
Okay.
73. We've got your Queen 2, March 8th, 74. So this band is definitely a lot of ear candy, a lot of intricate recording, playing, not so much like a big, crazy time signature type band, but they will do that. They almost do it the even more mature way where they will just throw it in, kind of like Rush. They will just throw it in and it actually still sounds musical, but it doesn't distract you and make you think that's happening. But we do have things like Procession on here, Father to Son, Ogre Battle. We've got Side White and Side Black, and very, very proggy old English folklore type themes. So that's proggy about it, and it's pretty heavy, as is the first album. The first album just feels a little more like demarcated songs, I suppose, right? And March 8th, 74, we've got the likes of Kansas. Um, this band is a full blown prog band from America, but they can sound pretty deep purpley and they can rock out at times. So it's even their most famous song, "Carry On Wayward Son," is pretty heavy. It's a pretty rocking song. So it's absolutely a very perfect progressive metal song, is what it is. So yeah, Kansas fits here as well. Hawkwind, Hall of the Mountain Grill, I put down September 6th, 74. Hawkwind is a band that has, the crazy psychedelic fantasy themes and album covers. They have a lot of keyboards, but they are a pretty straightforward four on the floor. They're almost more punk metal, in certain ways than even proggy, but they have proggy things about them. Even the singing can sound kind of proggy. They can be kind of ethereal and weird. So they fit. And then we've got the likes of, where is my copy of this here? There it is. So yeah, very important one. This really gets called a candidate for the actual answer when people want to be snobby and they don't go to what the more obvious answer is. But King Crimson Red, the last King Crimson album before the reunion, and probably the heaviest King Crimson album. I don't know if it's the heaviest period because you get up into your thrack era and that, and they're just like car crash music kind of thing. It's pretty noisy, right?
From
But
the
but
70s,
this,
no, it's definitely the heaviest. Yeah.
yeah, and this does pick up even from Lark's tongue. So yeah, this is an absolute classic again. Well, they even look like a power trio now, but they definitely sound like a crazy, insane proggy power trio on this album. So that's a very important one. Where are we here? October 74. Styx Man of Miracles, something like that. I mean, talk about a prog album cover. What a great album cover. Even title Man of Miracles is so cool. So
And
yeah,
that
they're
title,
just
the title track is total early prog metal. Total.
yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And metal. It's very Uriah Heep, right?
Yep.
So yeah, there's that one. And Kansas Mask, September 75. So they're moving on. Rush Fly By Night, February 14th, 75. More on Rush later. We'll leave that one to Pete. And then I've got something like this, Armageddon, July 75. They only made the one album on A&M Records, kind of a minor super group. But side one has 3 songs: Buzzard, Silver Tightrope, Paths of Plains, and Future Gains. So very proggy sounding. And side 2 only has Last Stand Before, and then a second track called Basking in the White of the Midnight Sun with with four parts to it. So this is both heavy and proggy and a little weird. It kind of fits in that Captain Beyond thing. Come to think of it, Captain Beyond's albums after that, um, Dawn Explosion, and I think it's called Sun and Steel, something like that.
Officially
Um,
Breathless, right? Or whatever. It's
Sunless, Sun something Beauty. I don't know. Or do they have three? I don't know.
three albums.
Uh,
Yeah,
but
three albums.
but they're less heavy than the first one. And they're maybe kind of proggy. I don't know. They're kind of in that weird we don't know what kind of band we are thing. What's the point of this band at that
Yeah, I
point?
mean, the second album is kind of Santana-ish a little bit, and the
Okay.
third album is kind of like
Yeah.
a mashup of the two. But they're all three are really good. But that first album is classic.
You know what else they remind me of? That the weird waywardness of Lucifer's Friend. Lucifer's Friend I actually checked out a few to see if they fit in here. It's just like, no, they don't really. It's such a strange band, right?
Yeah,
But they did figure on our in our heavy metal discussion. And then my final one for the pre first the true answer is Sabotage, Black Sabbath Sabotage. I think most people agree that this is their proggiest album. It's got two very long songs on it. Every single heavy song on here, let's see. Yes, every single heavy song on here goes to all sorts of strange places,
yeah.
completely surprising you. You think a Symptom of the Universe, half of that's a Santana song. Um, and it's got Don't Start Too Late. So it's got a short little acoustic thing on here. It's got Super Czar, which is a massive progressive metal instrumental.
Yep.
So this is a very good argument for this one as well. But what I say in these discussions is there are records, there are examples, there are bands that give you something that convincingly sounds like something that you could put in comfortably in a genre, in this case progressive metal, but Black Sabbath just somehow doesn't feel wired like a prog band.
Right.
Um, it's almost like they shift into it and then they prove that they're not wired by it by shifting out of it. So I think
Exactly.
once you get to Technical Ecstasy and Never Say Die, and certainly Heaven and Hell and Mob Rules, they're like saying, nah, I guess that was an anomaly. It was fun at the time, we did it, but we're not a progressive rock band
Right. In
kind of
other
thing.
words, this was our experimental period, but we're not a prog band. We're not a
Yeah,
prog metal band, right? And I think
exactly.
most people, when you really get into the weeds of this discussion, and when Black Sabbath comes up, everybody agrees that, maybe even Volume 4, Sabbath Bloody Sabbath and Sabotage, sees the band experimenting and going into other things. But then with Technical Ecstasy, that's forgotten, and they basically go back to doing what they know how to do. And it's is it prog metal? Maybe not, but is it prog metal-ish? Is it part of the equation in the discussion? I think so. I think that it has merits for that.
Yeah.
So, all right. So Martin ended there with July 28th, 1975. So our general consensus, and meanwhile, we had to come to an agreement here because Martin prefers the album that he mentioned before, and I kind of prefer the album that I'm going to mention in a few minutes. But the kind of the midway point was released September 24th, 1975, and that's Caress of Steel. So I think we can all agree that tracks like By Tor and the Snow Dog and Anthem are very prog metalish, right? There's probably enough on Fly By Night that we could technically say that might be it. However, I think they take that to the next level here on Caress of Steel, certainly with the Necromancer and the Fountain of Loudness. So you have these big behemoth long tracks, 12 and a half minutes long, 20 minutes long, right? And you got kind of, Bastille Day rocks, Think I'm Going Bald is weird. The Lakeside Park is kind of cool, like mellow melodic type of thing. But here's where we know prog metal features lots of long epic tracks full of all sorts of heavy parts and intricate parts and soloing and weirdness, and you get all that here. Did Rush learn a lesson from bands like The Who were doing these like long concept pieces and things like that? Absolutely. King Crimson as well. I mean, they also listened to bands like Genesis and Yes and all that. So I think the argument could be made that this really might be the actual right answer. This is what we're going to say today. But the fun of this whole thing is talking about all these albums before and after and seeing, well, is there something that maybe fits a little better? That's where we're going to go today. But what came in the wake of this, right? Because we have a lot of stuff here that was kind of percolating. in the wake of Caress of Steel. So we got the first Angel album, October 26, 1975. Pomp rock, certainly, a band certainly influenced by a lot of the prog greats, as well as bands like Styx and Kansas and whatnot. Lots of keyboards, Mellotron, some complex arrangements, the over-the-top vocals, right? It's heavy, it's proggy, it's melodic, right? Back to Styx once again for Equinox. Maybe their greatest prog metal album. Again, how metal it is, I don't know. It's certainly hard rock. There's certainly pomp. There's certainly prog on here. Sweet Madam Blue, I think almost anybody can make a case for as being a prog metal song. You got stuff like Lorelei and Midnight Ride is crunchy and heavy, right? Born for Adventure. A lot of cool stuff on there. What I often consider the an album that I think must be included. In fact, I included it on my top 10 progressive metal albums for a newbie, right? An album that anybody who is brand new to prog metal needs to hear, needs to have, and that's 2112 by Rush. If for nothing else than the title track, the 2112, epic, right? It's got all sorts of heavy stuff on there, real proggy stuff on here. You got Passage to Bangkok on here, something for nothing. It's got cool, intricate guitars and really, really great stuff here. The whole sci-fi kind of lyrical concept thing, right? Very, very popular sci-fi or fantasy, a little bit of both. Let's see, and that was March 76. So now we're in 76 now. So we've got Judas Priest, Sad Wings of Destiny. Big change from the album that came before, Rockarola, which is more kind of like heavy lumbering, early proto metal boogie rock. Here we've got some really intricate songs. We got the dueling leads, the high pitched, screaming vocals. You got Victim of Changes on here, Ripper, Tyrant is on here, Genocide, Island of Domination. It's heavy, it's forward thinking, it's complicated. Some might say, Martin, right, that this might be this album or the couple Priest albums that came after were the true birth of actual heavy metal, like metal metal. But that's a
Yeah.
topic for another discussion, another show,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
We won't get too into that. We're working way ahead of you, folks. We've already got the next show planned. So here's one, Rainbow Rising. You could arguably also say this is the first ever power metal album, along with some of the Uriah Heep stuff. So what's really cool about this record is you've got the vocal, right? You got Ronnie James Dio on here. You have the wealth of like back and forth keyboard and guitar soloing between Tony Carey and Richie Blackmore. Very indicative of the progressive metal genre that's to come. You got these big epic tracks like Stargazer, Light in the Black. It's just big, it's boisterous, it's symphonic, there's lots of soloing. You could make the case for this. Could make the case. Uh, Crystal Ball by Styx, continuing on with this blend of progressive rock and hard rock and all sorts of other things, right? Tommy Shaw joins the band here at this point. So Martin hinted at it before, so we've got Left Overture by Kansas. So this is October 21st, 1976. Crystal Ball is also October. Rainbow Rising May. Judas Priest March. Carry On Wayward Son. Again, is it metal? Maybe not, but it's pretty damn heavy, pretty complicated. I mean, for a radio-friendly track, there's a lot of really intricate stuff going on there. You've got, Magnum Opus is, one of their big prog epics on here. You got some other hard rock and stuff on here. You got those great vocals. You got violin, right? All sorts of different instrumentation. Back to Priest for April 8th, 1977, Sin After Sin. Again, this whole, it's heavy. It's definitely more intricate and progressive, arguably, than a lot of the Sabbath stuff. You got things like Starbreaker on here, Distant Aggressor, Sinner, Diamonds and Rust, cover of that track. A lot of really, really great stuff on here. Of course, classic album. Got Simon Phillips on drums. Then we have Styx, The Grand Illusion, maybe more prog than hard rock and metal, but certainly a lot of both. Very, very intricate compositions. The great three-way vocal attack, title track, Come Sail Away was a big hit. You got really proggy stuff like Castle Walls and Man in the Wilderness. Really cool. Another album from Rush, August 29th, 1977, A Farewell to Kings. Could folks make the argument that this album and the one that comes after it may be more metal? I think their most early metal might be 2112 title track, but you got title track on here, got Xanadu on here, you got Cygnus, in between you got stuff like Close to the Heart, Cinderella Man, and Madrigal. It's heavy, it's very complicated, very textured. Geddy's singing in that upper register voice, right? I mean, what's more prog metal than Geddy Lee's voice? Certainly doesn't sound like John Anderson or Peter
Yeah,
Gabriel, right? Or John
yeah,
Wetton. Certainly
yeah.
not. Scorpions Taken by Force, December 1977, maybe for, like their big popular song on that album, which is kind of like the Uli John Roth um, kind of staple from this point in the band. Again, Scorpions, they're kind of heavy. They're kind of like acid rock. It's got this neoclassical meets Hendrix type of thing. But a lot of cool stuff on that record, I think that could fit into this kind of early prog metal discussion. Stay in Class by Judas Priest. So now we're into 1978. So this is February 10th. Again, some cite this as their best work. Some cite this as early prog metal. Saints in Hell, Beyond the Realms of Death, a lot of shifting time signatures, a lot of dueling guitars, the shrieking vocals, you know, exciters on here, early speed metal, a little bit of everything here. Pieces of Eight, probably the last Styx album that can fall into this equation. Again, there's some pretty heavy stuff on here. There's definitely some proggy stuff on here. Queen of Spades is total prog metal. You got Lords of the Ring. You got, again, the fantasy lyrics. You got Blue Collar Man and Renegade, heavy stuff. Lots of church organ and synths and crushing guitars and whatnot. And then we have this. Uh, this to me is pretty much, with the exception of maybe circumstances, there's lots of prog metal on here. I would argue you don't get Fate's Warning and Dream Theater and maybe a few other bands later on without something like this. Again, a lot of prog metal before this. This is, I think, Rush fully realizing that we can do this kind of meeting of metal and prog. Cygnus, the Hemispheres, the book two is amazing. A lot of really intricate stuff on here, a lot of really heavy stuff on here. The wailing vocals, La Villa Strangiato, it's that really intricate instrumental. They would do more of that going forward, but can make a good case for that. And then as we get kind of later on here, we got lots of stuff now that comes as we're moving into the new decade. So you've got things like Merciful Fate, you know, some cite them as one of the first black metal bands because of the lyrical content, but I think musically speaking, borrowing a lot from what they learned in the Priest albums we mentioned, the Rush albums we mentioned. They were big prog fans, a lot of really intricate guitar work and riffs. More of a straight metal band, but it's definitely proggy in spots or has that mentality. We've got Iron Maiden's Power Slave. Again, a lot of people cite Maiden as a prog metal band. I don't really think so, but there are proggish things on here. We know that Steve Harris and Bruce Dickinson are big fans of like Jethro Tull and lots of Nectar and a lot of other prog bands from the 70s. But we've got Rime of the Ancient Mariner, the big epic on here. You got the title track. There's definitely some more complicated arrangements on this album. Queensryche Warning. All right. A lot of people cite Queensryche as a prog metal band. They have the big concept album coming up in a few years. I would argue that the stuff on here kind of is in this wheelhouse here. Very like metallic, complicated compositions, a little bit more intricate than the stuff we heard on the EP. Very, very cool record there. Got the Jeff Tate, the high pitched vocals, right? All of a sudden, the new Rob Halford is in town. We've got Fate's Warning, The Spectre Within, their second album, but the first album that really falls into the prog metal category. Now we're going to be looking at some albums that definitely are modern prog metal. And again, do we have this if we don't have Sabbath and Priest and certainly Rush
You,
doing what they were
you,
doing?
you should you should do a show where the CDs just fill up the screen and just tear down the wall.
Tear down the wall. We got more to come, folks. Hold on. I noticed that because I had to push it out of the way. I was like, all right, here we go. I got no room on this desk. It's crazy. But yeah, with the Spectre Within, again, those shrieking vocals, right? John Arch, and even the next album, Awaken the Guardian, even more proggy than this one, but this is kind of where it all started. You've got Watchtowers, crazy complicated old early math rock, right? Crazy stuff on Energetic Disassembly from November 30th, 1985. Fates Warning was October 1985. We move into 1987. Martin's wearing the shirt. Voivod, Killing Technology, arguably their first album that kind of moves away from this loud, obnoxious thrash meets hardcore sound into more complicated arrangements. Piggy's doing all sorts of really weird guitar tunings and everything's very complicated. The drumming is very complex. They would go even deeper into prog metal going forward, but that's really the first time they start doing that. That was April 2nd, 1987. Coroner's first album, RIP. Again, this whole idea, which we're going to touch on a little bit more, of thrash becoming very, very technical. All of a sudden, you've got bands like Korn, or right around the corner, you've got Megadeth doing these really complicated songs, Testament for sure as well, maybe a little bit of Exodus, right? A lot of bands that are kind of
Yeah.
doing that thrash thing and making it more and more technical. Crimson Glory, Transcendence. First album's more like a early power metal album with the amazing like Jeff Tate like vocals and shorter songs. And here we've got definitely more complicated arrangements coming into play. Again, this predates comes after Fate's Warning, but predates Dream Theater. Very important album there. Um, Perhaps the album that really started off prog metal as we would know it going forward. The debut When Dream and Day Unite from Dream Theater, which was March 6, 1989. Of course, Images and Words would be the album that started a whole movement going forward, but here's where it really all started. And again, I remember the first time I heard this album, Martin, I was like, is that like a Fates Warning album I haven't heard yet? And it's very Rush-like.
Hmm.
Kind of. I mean, that's the basis of what Dream Theater is all about.
Yeah.
Then we have some stuff. So we have Atheist Piece of Time from August 30th, 1989. Again, a death metal band incorporating lots of really complex arrangements and passages, mixing in jazz fusion guitar solos and really kind of embracing their proggy side, but also as you know, they were a death metal band. Toxic, again, another one of those thrash bands that really, really complex guitar riffs and soloing and breathtaking solos too. Think This is their second album from October 13th, 1989. Local guys, Toxic. Um, this band, you could argue, had some early prog metal moments on albums before this one, but I would say the 1990, early 1990 release from Savatage, Gutter Ballet, is their first instance of like starting to incorporate these grandiose piano orchestrations and keyboards and this whole the seeds of what would become the Trans-Siberian Orchestra, I think, really started on this record. So they go from In the Hall of the Mountain King, which is just a classic metal album, classic 80s metal album with some doomy vibes and epic vibes. And they go to here, they take it one step further and they add lots of epic arrangements and all sorts of other things. And all of a sudden, this Sabotage is like kind of entering into this realm as well. We've got a great underground band called Psychotic Waltz, who released their debut album in 1990, A Social Grace. Total prog metal of a different kind. So this is kind of combining early prog metal with like psychedelia, a little bit of prog. There's flute on here, really, really complex arrangements, intricate guitars. Again, you got the over-the-top vocals. Excellent, excellent stuff. More thrash, trying to be more technical, right? We got Rust in Peace by Megadeth. You got the dueling guitars of Marty Friedman and Dave Mustaine on here. Songs like, Holy Wars, The Punishment Due, Hangar 18, Tornado of Souls. Just it's thrash, but it's like thinking man's like thrash for smarter people, I guess, right? I don't know. But very well respected album right there. And then to kind of finalize all this off, there's a million Dream Theater offshoots that come after Images and Words, but I'm not going to kind of go there because that could be a whole separate show. But to circle back on this whole idea of extreme metal incorporating progressive metal kind of thought process, we've got Death releases Human, October 22nd, 1991. So Chuck Schuldiner decides I want to take this death metal thing one step further, and he's incorporating again this whole idea of laying down these really uber technical riffs, these just super melodic and almost fusion-y guitar solos, and the drumming is off the charts, and just taking this brutal form of metal music and making it a little bit more sophisticated, if that's at all possible. And then finally, September 13th, 1993, which we'll end here. This is Focus by Cynic, their debut album. So now it's almost like we're taking like the science fiction aspect of it and like cool space age technology and like so we're gonna mix vocoders with brutal death metal and a progressive mentality and jazz fusion and kind of throw it in and have all these weird vocals, like I said, and something completely, it's kind of spacey. It's kind of like space rock for death metal heads. So very, very cool album that was really taking what Death was doing and going in a totally different direction. And again, you would get lots of bands like, Pestilence would come after, and you'd have Morbid Angel and lots of these other extreme metal bands were starting to do more progressive and technical stuff in their music, and this kind of spearheaded a whole technical death metal style of music, which still continues to this day. So yeah, as you can see, the stack is big. Try to get it off screen as we go. So
Right.
I don't know, Martin. What do you think?
Yeah, I'll just to stay focused here, just let's go back to the true answer. I love this idea how we kind of work this out because in my mind I've always thought of Fly By Night as the album. And significantly, it's when Neil Peart comes into the band. So you do get busy drumming throughout and you get some of his flights of fancy lyrics wise. But I've come around to this idea of Caress of Steel definitely because, when I think of Fly By Night, I think of Best I Can, um, Fly By Night, Making Memories, Rivendell. In the end, basically all the rest of all of the second side is not particularly progressive metal. So it's almost like they're discovering progressive metal here. They're discovering who they are. They're still working it out. They've still got this new guy in the band. And I agree, Anthem, Between and Behind, and Bytor and the Snow Dog are progressive metal songs. But when you move over to Caress of Steel, there's no question about Necromancer and Fountain of Lamneth. And Bastille Day to me sounds like a progressive metal song, and so does Lakeside Park. It's a step up from Fly By Night, the song. I always put those two together.
Yeah.
But it's a pretty complicated riff that goes on in there. And then of course we still have Neil's complicated drumming. And then I think I'm Going Bald is if that was a standard heavy metal band, you'd say it's kind of a complicated song even for a heavy metal band at this time. So yeah, through and through, there's a fair bit of progress. Almost all the whole thing feels like a progressive metal album with these two massively long songs, and then I think two more songs, and then even I think I'm Going Bald. So this really they find out who they are on here. They get a trademark going, whereas Fly By Night is still that evolutionary thing where it's a little bit of the old band, a little bit of the new band. So yeah, I like this answer. I'll never agree with you and go too far into 2112. I think it's figured out. Caress of Steel. I always call Caress of Steel, facetiously, tongue in cheek, as like the demo version of 2112.
Yeah,
It's the same kind of record.
yeah.
It's just not quite as well
Not as
produced and
well
not
done.
quite as the
Yes,
songwriting isn't as good.
yes,
And so when anybody wants to put it down, including the band in general, and even sales wise, I always kind of fight back and say it's the same kind of thing. It's just not as good.
yeah. I honestly don't think you get 2112 or Farewell to Kings or Hemispheres if the band didn't do Caress of Steel. They kind of
Mhm.
figured out that this is what we want to do going forward. And then by the
Yeah.
time they were done with Hemispheres, they were like, all right, I think we've kind of had enough of that. Let's move on to
Yeah.
something else. Although, you could certainly make the argument that there are prog metal-y things on, the next two albums, right? Maybe not to quite the extent of some of these, but yeah, I mean, and for those who are kind of pondering this as we're talking, we fully understand that Caress of Steel is not like an out and out classic that either the one before or the couple that came after, but it's this whole idea of the building blocks for
Mhm.
what a lot of bands followed, and if we look at albums like, Rainbow Rising and some of the Priest albums and whatnot, I mean, they're contemporaries of Rush, obviously back then. But I think if you kind of pull all that stuff out and you like just look at the second half of my list, like going the 80s and forward, I don't think you could deny that those either that Rush album or those Rush albums were hugely influential on so many of these other bands that we talked about, later on,
Yeah.
and certainly the ones that are still coming out today. So yeah.
Nice.
So I'm comfortable with the Caress of Steel answer. It is funny how we our answer is one of the least popular of all their albums from this time period, but
Yeah.
but
Yeah.
the truth is in the pudding, right? I mean, it's like you may not like this album as much as some of the other ones, but you can't deny that there's some really cool early prog metal stuff going on there that not only pushed them in their direction, but maybe a lot of other bands as well. So
Well, and it makes sense that something called progressive metal isn't particularly commercially successful either. It's like the
there you
two
go.
things that all the
Yes.
critics hate: progressive
Yes,
rock and metal,
exactly.
right?
Nobody
So,
buys it. The critics they
yeah,
ignore it,
yeah,
but the true fans really, really love it,
yeah,
right? All the
exactly.
underground stuff.
Yeah,
So,
yeah. All
yeah.
right, we solved it.
Yeah, we solved it. There you go. All done. Put it in the books, right?
Yeah.
All right. So as we hinted at before, we are brewing the next idea of the true first metal album, right? So that's a little different than the heavy metal album, right? So I think
Yeah.
so, the heavy metal album, we were talking about lots of hard rock bands and things like that, and blues rock and all that kind of stuff. Metal's a different story, right? So, Black Sabbath kind of kickstarted it all, but there's other bands that like came forward with stuff that we consider metal. And I think the general consensus is true metal really didn't start till what, Martin, like late 70s is when
Well, let's not get
early
into
80s. It
albums and
floats
stuff,
around a
but
little
but I
bit, but
like what I like about this idea of doing a show on this is that eventually metal and heavy metal started to mean something different. I mean, it's
yes,
it's a it's a fine point. You have to be into this stuff to think so. But it's kind of like we joke. It'd be nice to do a show about rock one day, because we love how our English friends call what they call rock, and it means a very different thing to English, uh, you
yes,
know, listeners of music, have deep listeners of music than it does to Americans and Canadians. So that could be a good show too. But yeah, so it is an interesting discussion. Trust us, the first metal album.
yes, yes. So we're going to try and stay away from what now, because again, a lot of what we talked about in the heavy metal show, a lot of people consider just hard rock, right? But that's where the lines were blurred early on. So, or later on, we look back, it's like, yeah, we called them metal back then, but it's more hard rock, right? So we'll
Yeah,
try and
I don't know. I mean, I think more if I think about that discussion, I think a lot of that fits in say starting to move into 74, 75. It starts being we do call a lot of that stuff heavy metal, and we do call a lot of it hard rock. But
yeah,
again, this idea of dropping the heavy off of it is a very recent thing, and
yeah,
it's been applied to things going back 20, 30 years. But it's a funny one. Maybe we'll talk about it, but does it apply? What will it apply to something from the 70s kind of thing? But it's
yeah.
it's kind of interesting. So
Yep,
yeah.
absolutely. So, Martin, get us caught up what's happening with the Contrarians of late and with the podcast and books and things.
Yeah, check out my audio podcast, History in Five Songs with Martin Popoff, and our video channel, The Contrarians. And if you want to get any of my books, go to martinpopoff.com. And there's been lots there lately, big, massive doorstops for Dio, Iron Maiden, and Deep Purple, and then some updated books. Updated books on Whitesnake, Scorpions,
Merciful Fate.
Merciful Fate, and Max Webster. And Accept is coming back too. I was just been
Oh, wow.
editing
Okay.
that lately, so that one's been out of print for a long time, so that's coming back.
Nice. Martin's back in
Yeah,
business. Gotta love it. Gotta
yeah,
love it. Screw those tariffs. We're going to sell some books.
yeah. Exactly.
All right. So thanks for watching, everybody. And we'll see you next time here. I'm going to spend the next 20 minutes putting all these damn CDs away. That's always loads and loads of fun. As you saw, the
Yeah,
stack is moving.
yeah.
What do we got coming up here on the channel? We've got the professor's picks in a few hours. And so tune into that. Ken Golden will take over Martin's spot in the Zoom. We've got album homework assignment coming up tomorrow. We got a couple episodes. As a matter of fact, Martin and I will be going head to head on an album homework assignment. We recorded it like ages ago, and it's finally airing this coming weekend. That's how many we have quite the backlog of album homework assignment shows sitting in the can. So join Martin and I on a homework assignment show. We've each given each other an album to listen to that we've never heard before. So see if we like them or not. That's coming up tomorrow, and another one. I think the other one features our good buddy Guitar Hack and Craig Kaminsky. So those are the ones that'll be airing tomorrow.
Nice.
We've got ranking the albums coming up on Sunday. George Lamine and I will be ranking the instrumental albums from Iceberg, great Spanish fusion band. So that's coming up on Sunday, and then more to come after that. So till then, I am Pete Pardo for Martin Popoff. Have a great weekend, everybody. See you soon. Bye bye.